Sure, thank you. Has been a lot of topics, a lot of content so far. I would want to give everyone 30 seconds to zone out, but I think we have some minutes to catch up. So, so in today's world, in certain projects with SAP, we could feel like something like this here on the screen, whether it's an S4 transformation, whether you're moving from on-prem to cloud, whether you're moving from ECC to S4, or from a legacy to a new cloud technology. It could feel pretty much as if you're jumping out of a plane. And what do you think you need to be ready for? What we would want today is basically suggest a parachute, or suggest our solutions as a parachute in all of these projects that I've just mentioned, whether it's SAP migrations, digital transformations, or SAP transformations through RISE. You would want to have, and that is what the next 10, 20 minutes are going to be about, testing involved. So we in Tricentris do offer a testing platform. We are proud. We have been proudly added as a new SAP Solex partner just at the end of last year. And together we will be supporting you in all your testing endeavors that are needed with all of the just mentioned projects. Now, the SAP Solex products do cover 3 solutions that basically are applied to the whole testing cycle. If you look at the right-hand side first, when you start out with your testing endeavors, you would need to know what you need to test in the first place, because if not, you're starting out at the kind of green field, not knowing what to test, trying to build everything, not being able to catch up with timelines, etc. So at first, we would need to help you with what you need to test. Once we know what we need to test, we need to make sure that it works. So that is where our automation solution would be kicking in. That is where we build and maintain automated test scenarios. And last but not least, you would need to ask yourself the question whether the solution that you've built out does scale and is going to be able to keep up with the expected load from production systems. 3 solutions that help you achieve or that help you limit or mitigate risk in all 3 of these questions. SAP Change Impact Analysis, which is there to help point to the very tests that you need to run and build. Enterprise Continuous Testing, where you build out your automated test scenarios. SAP Load Testing, where you take those tests and scale them so that you can test whether your systems are going to keep up with the necessary production load. Good. We will be starting out with Change Impact Analysis by Tricentris. Now, Change Impact Analysis is applicable for any technology or any sub-technology that builds on the ABAP technology stack. In all those sub-environments, you would typically face a number of objects that are being used in that sub-environment. The example that I'm presenting here is a rather small environment where we have around 3,000 objects. Now, a classic or a typical impact analysis would now take a look at a change that's coming in and map all the different impacted objects against that change. That would typically only reduce the amount of objects by about 15%. As in SAP, if you do low-level changes, if you change a library, if you change a class file, that would funnel up to, there's going to be a lot of top-level T codes that are going to use those classes at the bottom end. So everything is kind of interconnected, and therefore it's very limited in the amount of savings that it can give you. Now, what we do in Tricentris on top of that classic impact analysis is what we call a most at risk or smart impact analysis. And what that does is, in addition to just the changes and the test environment, it also looks at how those processes being changed are used in production. Now, how does that work? Typically, if you roll out a new change, if you're developing on your sub environments, you typically have 3 environments that play along in that project. The dev environment, where you develop the changes and where you introduce your transports from. The test environment that will receive the changes and where you test whether the changes introduce any defects. Now, the first step in change impact analysis that's happening is that we look at the changes coming in, we run a code analysis, and we build a list of all the impacted objects. Now, as a next step, we would look into the production environments. We would run a usage analysis, which is basically looking at how our processes used in production. Are the changed objects being part of business critical processes? Who is using them? How often are those being used? And with that information, we consolidate what we call most at-risk capabilities, which typically comes to a reduction of 85% in scope. And in the testing teams now, all the teams have to focus on is those 15% of functionalities. While, testing those 15% of functionalities, they can be 100% sure that what they are testing is covering for all the changes coming in. So that means you can be very certain that you're taking no risks. What you need to test is being tested, and everything outside of that scope is not impacted by the change in the first place. But coming to our second solution, once we figured out what we need to change, enterprise continuous testing is where we build out those test cases that we then either manually or automatically, but ideally automatically run on our subsystems. Now, there's really 2 things that make us different to other competitors that you might have had a look at before. And I'll just mention those 2, so I'm not going to overwhelm you with a lot of feature names here. The first one being that building automation with Tosca or with enterprise continuous testing is scriptless. We do use a model-based approach that allows testers to build automation without the use of code or scripts. So within ECT, you'll never see a line of code. It's very easy for manual testers or people that come from a business background to become automation specialists quickly. And the key point or the key takeaway there is you don't need to hire or build a very specialized team, as you can make use of the resources that you already have, because automation really shouldn't be that hard, or should be that easy. The second is that the model-based approach mentioned does work across basically any, but it is 160 plus different technologies. It is the broadest technology support out there in our industry. That means that you can build an automated test that runs end-to-end or integration scenarios, transitioning from one technology to the other. We do cover technologies such as mobile, mainframe, other legacy technologies, and you can build a test that automatically starts up in a mobile application, further continues in your sub ECC, and ends counter verifying whether certain data made it into a database or into a PDF format, for example. Key takeaway here, model-based, and it's easy to automate. It should be easy. It does not need any coding or scripting. Good. Kind of all the 3 solutions that I'll be mentioning today can be used individually, but I wanted to point out that a big value add here would be if you use ECT in combination with CIA, which is change impact analysis, the solution that I've mentioned earlier. Change impact analysis would point you to the tests that you need to automate in the first place. Sometimes it can be a struggle for clients that kind of start in a green field for automation or for testing, because they don't know where to start at. They have thousands of scenarios. They don't know which ones are the most important ones to start their automation on. Now, this is what change impact analysis brings as a value. It points you to the very tests that are relevant now, and therefore gives you a very good blueprint on where you should start with your next test automation. Good. In terms of technology support, we have already mentioned that ECD does not only cover sub-technologies, but does also have a broad technology support for a lot of technologies outside of SAP. Some of those being, we've already mentioned, Android and iOS technologies, but whether you have a desktop Java app or another packaged app that kind of plays along with your SAP, whether that's Salesforce or ServiceNow, all of which can be included in automated scenarios. We do work very well with any of the popular DevOps tools out there. So whether that's a Jira where you either manage your sprints or manage your defects, you can use your requirements from Jira as a starting point into ECT. You can use a GitLab or a Jenkins or a TeamCity or any other common build tool out there to kind of orchestrate your test automation so that you can trigger those within a build pipe from those tools and retrieve the automation results back into those as well. And last but not least, report defect informations that you have found during automation automatically back into those defect management or ALM tools. Just so that I don't forget to mention, we do obviously have a strong integration and support of any SAP technology out there, whether that's SAP UIs or APIs. The ECT tool supports model-based automation for both UIs and APIs. On a reporting front, there is a few different options. I'll mention just a couple here. You do have the option to either export a report into many different formats. A popular format that our clients choose would be a PDF report, whereas at the end of any automation, or maybe at the beginning of the day, the beginning of a week, those reports can automatically be deployed and shared with your management so that the management always is on top and has a good overview on which areas in our SAP systems are being covered by tests positively and which ones do we have to have a closer look at. And the second would be our analytics capability that allows you to run dashboards that have basically a live view on what's going on in testing. But last but not least, sub-load testing by Tricentris. Now, what sub-load testing by Tricentris offers is the capabilities to run and scale tests to test for an application's performance. Load testing by Tricentris primarily generates the load that's needed for those tests from the cloud. And I'll use this to just briefly mention that all the three solutions that you've heard about today are primarily ran out of the cloud, but all three of which do have on-prem options. So if for any reason you cannot leverage a cloud solution, or you would want to encapsulate certain areas, such as, for example, test data into your on-prem environments, you can do that. You can run all three solutions or parts of the components in an on-prem environment, should you prefer that. Now back to sub-load testing by Tricentris. Sub-load testing by Tricentris does offer capabilities for both browser and protocol level load tests. And we in Tricentris are in the midst of adding capabilities to also include sub-GUI load tests that you can run and scale. I would mention sub-load testing by Tricentris is specifically relevant for the kind of projects that you might be looking into, as load testing is kind of the base thing where even if you have access to a lot of labor or cheap labor, as you might have, load testing is not something that you can run manually. It's not as if you need to test for 1,000 concurrent users. You can just hire 1,000 people, give them 1,000 computers, and have them press a button at the same time. It's not that easy. So for load testing, really what you would need to have is an automated solution, because it's not something that you can just easily run with a few people on site. Good. To wrap things up, a couple things about Tricentris that we are proud for. SAP has chosen us as their preferred partner in testing for a few reasons. Some of them might be that we are recognized as the leader in our industry by all these three major analysts, whether that's Gartner, Forrester, or IDC, all three of which are naming us as the leader in their latest analyst results as well. A few of our global customers, I'll leave that screen on for just a few seconds. Maybe you can relate to one of the logos as being close to your industry. And if you have any questions or would be interested in maybe a success story or a use case of our solutions being used in SAP with some of those accounts, feel free to reach out to me. I'll leave my contact information at the end of this session so that you have my email ID and you know where to reach out to. To summarize, what we're doing in the industry is see it as, if you start here on the right-hand side, testing today is the #1 impediment in software delivery. When you develop a new software iteration, and that's also true for the SAP world, it's not really that coding or planning takes up the most time. It usually, and that is a report from the World Quality Report, it's usually testing that takes up the most time. So this is where we are entering. We would want our clients to save time in testing. Our solutions will help them decrease or increase the velocity by 10x, while simultaneously saving them costs, because it's easier to run tests automated and it's easier to scale than compared with a manual approach or other solutions out there. So to sum things up, here on the left-hand side, we would like to get you to a 10 times faster release cycle, while simultaneously helping you to reduce your business risk by 90%. And we can do that because our tests are tied to a business risk, so, and not just to a number of tests that you execute. So whenever a test fails, you would immediately know what the business risk implied is, as well as through our change impact analysis that we have mentioned earlier, that helps you point to the very areas in SAP that you need to focus your tests on. Good. I've come to the end of my session. I think I've been able to save us a few minutes. If there's any questions, let me know and I'll be happy to cover a couple.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. I think there are no questions at this point of time. Just a minute, I've got one question.
Sudhakar, there is one question which I had.
Yeah. Pushkar, please go ahead, Pushkar.
Yeah. So Thomas, I just wanted to check whether code vulnerability is a critical area, when you're testing for any vulnerabilities in the coding itself, right? So is that something that Tricentris also goes ahead and covers?
Sorry, can you help repeat the first half of your sentence?
Code vulnerability testing. If there are any issues in the way vulnerability, if there are any issues in the way the code has been written.
Okay. So as ECT focuses on functional automation, and that is really on a process level and an end-to-end and integration level, ECT really focuses on the functional business process level. However, within change impact analysis, we do have capabilities that help code guard and help you look into the code that's being deployed to your SAP systems and help you keep up with code standards. It also automatically suggests certain improvements. For example, if the code that you have deployed would introduce bad performance, some of our applications in change impact analysis can become aware of that and let you know that you might want to pay a second look at that area of code, because there might be better ways to solve that.
Thanks, Thomas. That's useful. Thank you.